Welcome to In Her Voice. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am passionate about helping women live authentically by listening to their inner voice. Get ready to be inspired by women of all walks of life that have set aside their should-bes and not good enoughs and are standing in their true voice, the voice of wisdom that each and every one of us has inside. Hello, this is Kelly Covert, and you are listening to In Her Voice. And I am so glad that you're here today and that you decided to welcome me in to your world today. Thank you so much. I am so excited to tell you that today's podcast is sponsored, you heard that right, by Studio Sweden. Studio Sweden is a lifestyle brand that makes premium headphones with studio quality sound and a classic Scandinavian design. These are way more than just headphones, you guys. They are like beautiful accessories, and when you put them in your ears, you just feel like you're like premium quality. And you know what? You are. And I want to give you guys the opportunity to check them out for yourself. You're really going to love them and want to listen to more inner voice on them. So if you want to check them out, maybe give yourself a gift for the holidays or a gift for someone that you love, head on over to kellycovert.com/studio. That's SUDIO, as in, studio. Yeah, I just sang on the podcast. Good old Phil Collins fans will appreciate that. Anyway, kellycovert.com/studio, and you can check them out. And if you use the code VOICE15, that'll give you 15% off. So let me know what you guys think. Today, my guest is Rebecca Wong, and we are talking about intimacy. And this is a super interesting conversation because we're not just talking about intimacy with others, as in revealing the deepest parts of yourself with others. We're talking about intimacy with yourself, getting to know yourself on that deepest level. And I don't think that that's something that we often think about. And so I'm just really excited to share this conversation with you. Let me tell you a little bit about Rebecca. Rebecca believes that when you truly see yourself, you create the ripple that allows you to be the change you wish to see in the world. And that invites everyone around you to do the same. She dreams that we can collectively learn, grow, and lean into the possibility of leaving behind a more resilient and compassionate planet than we were born into. Rebecca is the host of the Art of Being Seen podcast, which is a podcast that I love. And she also practices as a licensed clinical social worker in New York's Hudson Valley, where she resides with her husband, their spunky kids, and a handful of four-legged furry mischief makers. Sounds like her life is a lot like mine, doesn't it? Anyway, you guys are just going to love Rebecca. Her voice is just to die for. I mean, like I feel like I could just put it on and have her voice wash over me, and it will help me like calm down and see all of the good in the world. And I know you're going to love even more what that voice has to say. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this interview with Rebecca Wong. Hey there, Rebecca. Welcome to In Her Voice. I'm so excited you're here today.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.
Sure. And I'm super excited to dive right into this idea of intimacy. That's really what you do in your own practice, is you work with individuals and couples regarding intimacy and relationships. But what I find really interesting is this idea of being intimate with yourself. And so I was hoping maybe you could start there.
Yeah, well, I really feel that in order for us to have intimate relationships with anyone, we have to know ourselves. Because if we don't know ourselves, if we can't discern how we feel and we're just kind of out of tune with ourselves, there's no way for us to really share ourselves and for other people to see us as we want to be seen.
Right. And so what goes into this idea of knowing who you are? I mean, it seems like a lot.
It seems like a lot. And yes, it also somehow feels like it should be this thing that we just know how to do.
Right.
So it's kind of funny because we don't necessarily give it the energy that it needs all the time. And I think there's a lot of different ways to get there. I don't think that there's one way, and there's certainly not one right way. I think one of the most important things for us all to kind of keep in mind is it's a process of looking in. It's a process of being able to see yourself, being able to see, how do you feel? And so often in our culture, in our society, our feelings are the things that get shut down.
Right. Do you think that that's because we have expectations or because we're so busy? I mean, why do you think that we do that?
I think there's a lot of different pieces. Some of it is what we're taught culturally, boys shouldn't cry.
Right.
Right. And girls have to kind of play smaller in many ways. They can't take up too much space. So there's all these different messages that we get. But I think another part of it, and this is perhaps one of the parts that we don't talk about very often, is that feelings can be uncomfortable. And we don't like to go into uncomfortable places. We don't like to give the space to those things. And so we just shut them down. And when we do that, we create all these stuck places within ourselves. And when we do that, we get out of tune and out of sync with ourselves.
You speak on your website of your own deep work that you've done through this process. And if you're anything like me, I imagine it's ongoing.
Always.
Right? Because you're always discovering something new about who you are. But I was wondering if you could give us a bird's eye view of what that looked like for you in the really sort of sticky parts.
Oh, God. Are we talking about yesterday or are we talking about a few years ago? I think I have these moments all of the time. I don't think that there's a single aspect of my life where I'm not having these moments. The thing for me is that I'm noticing that I'm having these moments. And I've gotten better at noticing when I'm having them. Even last night, my husband and I were having a conversation and it got into a sticky place. And being able just to kind of tolerate it and sit in that stickiness, it didn't mean that we were disconnecting from each other. It didn't mean that there was anything at risk. It meant that being able to sit and sink into the kind of the mud of it, that's where the intimacy happens. That's where the growth is. It's in the not knowing place. It's in the, in the Buddhist tradition, they talk a lot about how lotus flowers grow in mud. Right? Mm-hmm. That these beautiful flowers, they only grow in these dark, muddy places. And it's true for intimacy that often it's in these places that sometimes we wouldn't dare to go, where we can have the most intimate connections, but we have to be willing to sink into them.
Oh, I really love that idea. And it makes me think of a situation that I had with my husband just this last week where he told me he was mad at me. And my go-to reaction when anybody is mad at me, or really anybody that I love is feeling some sort of hard emotion, is that I want to manage that for them. Like, I want to make it be all good. And it's interesting to me that that's a reflection of sort of what I do for myself. Like, I've gotten really good at understanding what I need to move through emotion. And so I try to make everybody else do that too.
But we're all different.
Exactly.
And we don't all do it the same way.
Yeah. And what I recognize in that situation with my husband is that I have to allow that. Like, I have to allow him to be mad at me. Yeah. And that's okay.
And I notice when my husband is mad at me that sometimes that's where our most juicy growth moments come from. Because in those moments of feeling those really uncomfortable feelings of sitting together with them, that's where we really get to learn about each other. It's where we get to learn where the disconnects are happening, what kind of things are needed, what hasn't been happening that we really can refocus on. How can we come back together? We can't get to those places if we keep brushing away those moments.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. And it's the same idea. It's in a relationship as with yourself, right? It's about allowing yourself to feel it and digging in. And going to that muddy, uncomfortable place and saying, okay, what is it that this is telling me?
Yeah.
So there's this beautiful quote that you have on your website that you said, it's your quote, and it goes like this. When you truly see yourself, you create a ripple effect that allows you to be the change you wish to see in the world. And that invites those around you to do the same. So I really hear you saying that this is important work for us individually, but it's also important work for the world. Can you talk about that?
I'd love to. You know, I feel like there's so much going on in our world right now. There's so much hurt. There's so much shadow being uncovered on so many levels. And we're also a part of it. Collectively, we are all a part of it. None of us escape this. And if we can look at ourselves, if we can do the hard work of taking a moment to pause and look within, look at the things that hurt us, look at the places where look at the places where you might feel that you have even wronged somebody, that you've done something wrong, and sit with it. Sit with those uncomfortable parts of yourself and learn from it, grow from it. That's the place that we connect to others with. That's the place where compassion can grow. That's where empathy can grow. You know, so many of us are engaged in conversations right now about racism and bias and inclusivity and equality, and all of these things start within. They all start with the lessons and the messages that we're taught in different ways and different capacities. And so many of us in our own ways, I don't care who you are, we've digested different pieces of these conversations. They've become parts of us. So we need to start by looking within and looking at these parts instead of pointing the finger outward. All of us, on some level, have hate living inside of us. We can't escape that. And hate can either be directed inward or it can be directed outward. When we see it directed outward, it often looks like contempt. You are awful. You do this. And we can do that to our most intimate partners, just like we can do it to people that we don't know. When it's directed inward, it often looks like shame. I'm so awful. I never get this right. So either way that it's directed, paying attention to that voice, taking a look at it, noticing when you're in your darkest place, how do you talk to yourself? Like, that's a really powerful moment, because if you can start to flip that script a little bit and to start being gentler there, that's where that ripple starts.
So how do we start that? I mean, it seems like a simple question, but for someone who has had a lifetime of beating themselves up, of carrying that shame, maybe it's over a certain circumstance or just in general, what do you say to them? Like, where do you begin?
Just noticing it. I don't like to put too much pressure on it, not in the beginning, probably not ever. I like to start with just noticing it. Notice the words as they come up. Just notice them. Mm-hmm. Eventually, those words in and of themselves are going to get more and more uncomfortable if you stay with the practice of noticing them.
Yeah.
And when they get uncomfortable, that uncomfortable place is going to motivate change.
I love thinking of it as a process like that. And I think also this is where we can rely on people that are close to us that love us to help us with that. Like, for example, when I hear my friends saying something negative about themselves, I call them out. I will say, please don't talk about my friend like that. Because oftentimes we're doing it without even realizing it. So it's about bringing that mindfulness up, taking account, like really being responsible for the words that we're using on a daily basis.
Yeah, I call this a connectfulness practice.
Ooh.
So it becomes this ongoing practice of being able to both look inward. It starts with being seen. It starts with seeing yourself. And then it goes into this more creative process and then into an action process. So it's kind of like a 3-step practice. But it all begins with the noticing, with the slowing down and looking in.
So your podcast is actually The Practice of Being Seen. And I think that's such an interesting name. And I bring that up because you just talked about this idea of seeing. And when I think of that, of being seen, you know, what I imagine is like I'm on a stage and people are seeing me, right? Yeah. But really, I mean, can you tell me actually what you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm talking about a much more introspective depth work process. I'm talking about the practice of seeing yourself, the practice of being seen by you, and the intimate sharing of allowing yourselves to be seen by others, whether that means in a partnership, with friends, or on stage.
Ooh, like my heart just started beating a little bit faster when you said that, because I think of how in our lives connection is so important. Yet, if we're not developing that connection with ourselves, it's going to be hard for us to develop true connection with someone else.
Yeah, it ends up being empty.
Whew. Well, and so can we talk about that a little bit more? I mean, how do we build the trust and build the courage to open ourselves up in a vulnerable way with someone else?
Oh, I love that question. I think this really begins with building the capacity to sit with ourselves. And I know I keep coming back to this. I know I might sound like a broken record.
No, we need to hear it.
But this is really like much of the practice. If your listeners may know about mindfulness, I'm not so sure, but much of the mindfulness practice of conscious breathing begins with just noticing your breath, noticing that you are breathing, and noticing that there is an in-breath and there is an out-breath, and bringing your awareness to the direction of your breath. And eventually, if you keep practicing this for 3 breaths or 10 breaths or 3 minutes or 30 minutes, your attention is going to wander. It's going to go somewhere else. The work of mindfulness begins when your attention wanders, because you come back. It's about noticing that you wandered and bringing your attention back, coming back to the breath. The practice of connectfulness, the practice of looking within and doing this depth work, is also a practice of noticing and of coming back to yourself, noticing where you feel the disconnects, noticing where you're not seeing yourself, where the walls are. What's the stuff that is that you're defended against? And why are those defenses there? How have you needed them in the past? How have they served you? What's the power in them? And do you still need it now? Or is there space for you to kind of disarm it a little bit and look a little deeper?
Ooh, that is such juicy stuff, because it's really, like you said, it's about digging deep and doing that deep introspection of seeing yourself. Hey, you guys, I just wanted to pop in here really quickly. And I thought that this was the perfect moment, since Rebecca was talking about connectfulness, because I really believe that one of the ways I stay connected with you and you stay connected with me is by inviting me into your ears as you listen to In Her Voice and sharing this space of In Her Voice with me. And I'm so grateful for that. And I know that many of you do that with your earbuds. And that's why I wanted to share a little bit more about Studio, this episode's sponsor, because you deserve the best. And if that means the best that you can put into your ears while you're listening to the best podcast In Her Voice, then you should check these out. And I'm telling you, I was stunned when I received them. They are gorgeous. I got the Vasa model, and they're white and they have like rose gold accents. And I also got the memory foam earbuds, because for some reason, I think I just have weird shaped ears. Earbuds don't stay in my ears, but I got the memory foam ones and they are amazing. And what I love about them is when I listen to a podcast, when I'm editing this podcast, when I'm talking on the phone and I'm using these earbuds, I feel like I am with the person. I feel like I'm connected to that person. And when you have me in your ears, that's an intimate experience and something that I am so grateful for and I don't take for granted. And so that is why I want to bring you this discount from Studio. If you use the code VOICE15, you can get 15% off. And I just checked over on the website and everything is on sale right now. So now is the perfect time to head over to kellycovert.com/studio and check them out. They would make great gifts too. So if you have a loved one in your life that you want to be more connected to when you talk to them or when you share a podcast with them, check out Studio, kellycovert.com/studio. And don't forget to use the code VOICE15 for 15% off. Now let's get back to Rebecca. So you said that's the first step, right? The seeing, the mindfulness. And then the second thing is a creative step.
It's a creative step. Yeah. Well, once you can see yourself, you can start envisioning what you want to become. You can start envisioning how you want to shape your relationships. You can start seeing what changes you want to see in the world.
Can I pause you right there and just ask you, why do you think that we can't see that before we do step one?
Because our own stuff is just building up these walls. We can't see it clearly. We can have some understanding, maybe of some direction of what we think we want, but we can't necessarily, until we can work through our own biases, until we can work through our own isht, we can't necessarily see all of what is possible. And we're always going to walk around the world, even when we start doing this work of seeing the world through our own lens, seeing the world through the way that we understand the world, that only we can ever understand the world. But the more we become aware that this is my lens, the more we can start to understand how we can form those connections and create those impacts with other people.
Yeah, I love that. So and we're going to keep going with the creative part, but I just want to have this little sidebar here. This podcast is all about listening to your inner voice. And I really feel like even when you're doing the work, like even if you've just started, you still have those walls, but maybe you can peek around them a little bit. You can start to see the possibility, right? I feel though that connecting down to our inner voice is like, it's always there for us, regardless of the walls. Like it's there, and that is the truth speaker in our life. Do you feel the same way?
I do. I think there's different levels of it. Kind of like if you think of a lotus flower or an onion, whichever analogy you're more comfortable with, there's all these different layers. There's these different levels, and the more you peel back, the more you get to see.
Yeah.
Right? And so the more depth work you do, the more you get into this rhythm of being able to tune in a little bit easier to what this inner voice is. It becomes more of a muscle. Whereas when you haven't done this work, it's a lot harder to reach. It's a lot harder to get to. It's a lot harder to trust, hey, that is my voice.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not that you don't have it. You always have it. It's the process of how do you trust it?
Right. Or even how do you hear it? Because sometimes it's really noisy. Okay. So getting back to this idea of creating. So we start to envision.
So can I back up a little bit?
Sure.
I want to kind of add something in here about creativity. So many of us walk around the world with fear, right? Like anxiety, worries. And these are all, I believe, really good things. I don't think that there's anything wrong with fear. I think it's a wonderful portal, and it helps us see the things that need to change. When we can do that, when we can sit with it and peer into that fear, that anxiety, that worry, those difficult feelings, that's where the creativity blossoms.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The opposite of being stuck is movement. Creativity is movement.
Right.
Right? So we can either get stuck and held and put these walls up around our fears and our anxieties and our worries, or we can dive into them and allow ourselves the movement of becoming more creative.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree with you there. And I tell the people that I work with, I see fear, like I imagine that I'm on a highway and fear pops up like a sign, like in front of me, like, oh, get off the road. Things are going to go bad. And then in that moment, I have that choice of keeping going down the highway, or exiting off and going back to where I came from. And so when I see those signs, to me, they're exciting, because that means I'm moving into this territory of, like you said, of creating, of stretching, of growing, of evolving.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So we use the fear to fuel the creativity.
Yeah, it becomes the portal into that creative space.
Like that's just like a door right in. Yeah, beautiful. And then what comes next?
Action.
Okay, and that's a biggie.
It is. And, I also just want to kind of point out that all of these phases, they work together. We're never fully in one, and they're not just linear. It's not like we go 1, 2, 3. We dance around in all of these. Mm-hmm. But the action comes next, because when you can see yourself and when you can kind of harness that creativity, now you know what to do. You know what the change is. And so this works on a lot of different levels, whether we're talking about being on stage or writing that book you've been dreaming about, or we're talking about how to lean into your relationship a little bit more intimately, or we're talking about listening to your voice. On all of these levels, you can take more action. Last night when I was sitting and having this uncomfortable conversation with my husband, the action that I got to take and the creativity that kind of got sparked inside of me was to listen in a different way.
Yeah, I find this a lot too for me in my relationships with my children. Mm-hmm. So I'm always trying to discern a new way of connecting with them, a new way of understanding them, so I can meet them meet them where they are. Mm-hmm. And I really love that, because it's exciting also. Like it feels new all of the time. And I think that newness, especially in our romantic relationships, is something that goes away after a while. So if we can really be using this as a way to kind of keep the excitement in there, that is also a plus.
Yeah. I think we all have to remember that we never really fully know anybody, including ourselves. Right. So there's always this self-discovery thing happening, and it's an outward discovery too. I know I was recently on vacation with my family, and we were driving home, and my daughter she was 9 years old, almost 9 years old. And she was having a little mini meltdown in the car, as kids do. Yep. And I turned to her and I said, did this all start with this thing? And I just kind of pointed out what my observation was. And she was able to sink into that being seen moment. Mm-hmm. And from there, we were able to connect and start processing together and start figuring out how to create more space. But it all begins with being seen, whether that's seeing somebody else or seeing ourselves. And as parents, often one of our jobs is to help our children learn how to do this work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that to be challenging because me, like I said before, I'm the person who manages everyone's emotions. Mm-hmm. And I really am trying to step back from that. And instead of, doing it for them, which I think as a mom, it is a natural tendency, but one that I have to check in order to allow them.
Can I offer you a new word?
Yeah.
Okay. So instead of managing, what if we shift that word to guiding?
Love it. Love
right?
it.
It takes some of the responsibility away. It still puts you in a mentoring role, but it shifts something in a pretty big way. And these are the kinds of little shifts that I coach my clients through.
I love that. So from managing, I'm writing this down.
Yeah.
From managing
to guiding.
Yeah. And that just feels so much more loving. Also, I love that.
And it gives the people in your life a little bit more permission to do more for themselves.
Yes.
Because they're not going to rely on you to do the managing.
Yeah. Fantastic. Oh, this is so good. So I love what you had to say, and I appreciate you saying this, that we're always in all of these steps. Yes. Because I think that a lot of the women who listen to In Her Voice are type A, perfectionists, go-getters, they're smart, and they know how to hustle. And so there's this feeling like, okay, once I start doing this, I'm going to do it all of the way, all of the time. And if I have a moment where I find myself up against that fear again, that means that there's something wrong with me, that I'm not doing it right.
And I want to challenge that thought. I would say that when you have a moment where you're up against that fear again, that means that you're doing it exactly right, especially when you notice the fear. Because remember, that's the portal into the creativity.
Right.
And if you're not noticing that, then you're not able to access it.
And what I hear you saying, and I believe this too, is that it's required. Right?
It's incredibly, I mean, there's no way to do it without the fear.
Yeah. And so when we see it like that, all of a sudden we can welcome it, it as much as it, as in knowing that it's still going to feel uncomfortable and it's still going to cause whatever feelings those fear cause in you, but it's still like, yeah, it's here. That's exciting.
And then that also brings us back to the first step, the step of seeing ourselves. Because oftentimes the thing that gets in the way of letting that fear be exciting is that we don't feel safe.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, whatever the old baggage, the old stories are, we don't feel safe. And we probably have really good reasons to not feel safe. But that's where we go back into that earlier part of the process of seeing what those stories are, of understanding them, of noticing them, and seeing if this is a time to disarm them or not, but kind of doing that little dance with yourself.
So it's always an opportunity to peel back another layer.
Yeah.
And to understand.
And it doesn't always mean that we have to dive into the fear. It doesn't always mean that we have to take action or become creative. Sometimes the work is noticing, I don't feel safe here.
Right.
And I need to keep this wall up.
Mm-hmm. And I think having no judgment around that.
No, I mean, that's part of the work, and it's just as legitimate.
Yeah. That's so good. And I really believe that in our own practice of self-love, we learn how to love others more deeply. And that's what I hear you saying here too. So as we see ourselves, we learn how to see others more deeply and validate them and say, and just be with them.
Because when you can be with yourself, then you can start to be with others. But when you struggle to be with yourself, sitting with somebody else is going to constantly trigger you.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I just want to take a moment of silence and let some of this soak in, because it's so critical. This is our life's work.
It is.
And I feel like so often we get into this place of, what is my purpose in life? Why am I here? And this is why we're here. Don't you think?
Totally.
Oh, so good.
I find that this work of what I call connectfulness is very much about intimacy. It's very much about discovering and finding and honing into where you find meaning in your life. And I also talk a lot about playfulness, because play is something that, it's something we can do with our thoughts. It's something that we can do with how we show up in the world. It's also something that we can't do when we feel unsafe. So very much a lot of play is this quest for safety, for feeling more secure in the world. And when we feel more secure, we can have deeper, more intimate, more meaningful connections.
That's so interesting, because I feel in my own life, playfulness is something that I squashed down for a really long time. I didn't allow myself to do that. And it's just been in the past few years that I really opened myself up to my own playfulness in a bigger way. And it's really, I have found so much freedom in that, in just to be more of who I am.
Yeah. And I think there's so many different ways for us to be who we are, right? Like if I really like working on cars, that can be my play. If I really like having deep conversations and I start a podcast, that can be my play. If I love, building forts, that can be my play. There's no right or wrong way. It's about finding the thing that you can geek out on, the thing that you can do for hours and get lost in, the thing that just lights you up. That's where you play. There's no right or wrong way to do it.
And here's where we can go back to this place of, if you're listening to your inner voice, if you're connecting there, that's where you're going to find that.
Yeah.
So I am curious, Rebecca, what in your life is your inner voice saying to you these days?
My inner voice is really calling for me to start writing more and to have a lot more deep conversations with people around all these uncomfortable places in our life, around racial issues and prejudice and bias, and to talk more about all of the places where we're feeling excluded, where we're feeling othered, where we're having a hard time feeling that we all belong. So these are conversations that I plan to explore a lot more on my podcast this season. And it's just the direction that I'm intuitively being guided.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to listening to those. And I'm so glad that you listen to your inner voice so we can all receive all of that that's coming out of you. So, and I agree with you. I think that these are important conversations to be had, even and especially when they're uncomfortable. Yeah. So thank you for being brave and for putting that out there for us. And I would love for you to share with our listeners how they can connect with you online, your website, your social media, and all that wonderfulness.
Yeah. Thank you. I have 2 websites. The first one is Connectfulness, ConnectFulness.com. And there you can find my clinical practice and all the links to everything around that. And my other website, practiceofbeingseen.com, is the home of my podcast and my consultation with other therapists as well.
Great. And I really encourage all of you listeners to go check out Rebecca's podcast because it is very good and you guys are going to love it. If you love inner voice, you're going to love the practice of being seen. So Rebecca, thank you so much for being on In Her Voice. I want to take this moment here with you to acknowledge you, to honor you for what you're bringing into this world. Your voice, your physical voice, and the voice that you're putting out into the world with the words that you're saying and the practices that you're practicing in your life are so valuable. And I appreciate you setting an example for all of us so that we can learn together from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you for having me as a guest. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and your listeners.
Oh my gosh. Did we just touch on everything? Fear, intimacy, knowing yourself, being able to share that with others. Oh, I am just so grateful for Rebecca. And you want to hear something really cool, you guys? We did this interview several months ago. And since then, we actually are in together a podcasting group. And that's just a recent thing. And it's been so wonderful to reconnect with her and to get caught up in what she's doing. And she's doing really amazing things with her podcast. So I really encourage you guys to go check that out. And, if there was something on this episode that really resonated with you, please let us know. You can tag me on Instagram at Kelly J. Covert, or you can shoot me an email, whatever works for you. But it is so encouraging to me to hear from you guys, for you to say, yeah, this meant something for me. This changed me, even if it was just a little way of making you think differently. That really matters to me. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. And I just want to share one more thing with you today that I've been taking the time to do, and that is to plan for a new 5 days of journaling live. So, you can do my 5 days of journaling challenge anytime you want on my website. But coming up at the end of November, for the last week of November, I am going to be doing it live with you guys, and it's going to be all new prompts, and it's really going to be about connecting with your vision for the new year. This is perfect if you have big dreams, if you have big plans, if you have transformation in mind, if you are a world changer, and you know that I think you are. This is for you. If you have a business, if you want to create impact in this world, I invite you to join me in the last week of November live for my 5 days of journaling challenge. So if this sounds like something that's right up your alley and something that you need right in this moment, which is not an accident, by the way, just click on over to kellycovert.com/journal. And you can sign up, and we're going to get started on November 27th. So go ahead and sign up now, and then you'll be all set, and you'll get some emails from me when it's time to get started. So thank you guys so much for being here today. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for what you're doing in the world and how you're showing up each and every day. Even on the bad days, even on the hard days, you know you. And you do you best of all. Always remember that. You are worthy.